Well, a new anti-racism campaign has been launched overnight. It's been commissioned by the organisation, which over the years has been accusing just about everyone, from cricketers to comedians, of racism, the Australian Human Rights Commission. The ad features a mix of white participants and people from multicultural backgrounds, all pointing to examples, allegedly, of racism and how they feel about the racism they faced. It's scheduled to appear on multi-platforms and claims to be using examples from everyday life. Now, I'm questioning the examples contained in the ad now because the ad presents some pretty wild claims. The Australians from diverse backgrounds reckon they're more likely to be stopped by police. They're more likely to be screened at the airport as well. Have a look at what they've produced.
How old was I when I became aware of my race?
I say I was quite young, maybe around about 6 or 7.
Then you go out, you go to school, you meet people, and you're different to everybody else.
I probably became aware of my race in my later years.
Has my mental health ever been affected by racism?
Racism is not something that I've ever had to face.
Now, according to one participant in the ad, and it goes a lot longer than that, there are only white people in positions of power and authority, only white people. Is that not a gross generalisation? I would have thought so. Only white people? Chin Tan, the Australian Race Discrimination Commissioner, who, by the way, is not a white person but is in a position of power, Chin Tan says racism is a long-standing issue in Australia. If we're going to make a change, then we need people from right across the spectrum, including those who don't have experiences of racism. Chin Tan says COVID-19 shone a light particularly on the anti-Asian hate in Australia, while Black Lives Matter highlighted injustices, particularly against Indigenous and African Australians. It has been on the rise and remains a serious challenge to our capacity to live in a just, free and equal society, unquote. Hold on a second. Let's take some of that apart. One, they need those who don't have experiences of racism. If they don't have experiences of racism, why encourage them to look for it? Two, COVID-19 shone a light on the anti-Asian hate in Australia. They say that like as if it's a given that Australians hate Asians. That may have been predominant in the 70s and 80s as we adapted to the first part of Asian migration, but I'd argue strongly that there is much less anti-Asian sentiment in this country than in decades past. It's the Chinese Communist Party we all have very little time for, not the Chinese people who've made Australia their home. Three, Black Lives Matter highlighted injustices, particularly against Indigenous and African Australians. Come on, Black Lives Matter highlighted the exceptional division between black and white in the United States of America. And it was an activist section of the Indigenous population who adopted the Black Lives Matter creed and tried to apply it awkwardly in an Australian context. But there's no such comparison. We don't have the same history leading to the level of division between black and white in this country, certainly not existing today. And four, Black Lives Matter highlighted injustices against African Australians. There are just 380,000 African-born Australians in this country. How is that a thing? And five, racism is an issue on the rise. Well, that's just plain wrong. So as far as I see it, yes, there are pockets of racism in Australia. We have to admit that. But the culprits are usually too stupid to know any better and behave badly right across the spectrum in general. If there's one advantage of having close to 200 different nationalities in this country, is that racism becomes extremely diluted. The differences between us become the norm. Schools don't tolerate racism as they used to, and parents know that. Workplaces too no longer put up with racist name-calling as they may have in the 60s and early 70s. We are an increasingly tolerant and generous nation to new arrivals. And the more we experience other races of people in our work, in our neighbourhoods, the more we learn to live with each other. That's certainly my experience. It might be yours. It might be an ad campaign worth running. But spare us the generalisations, and any claim that racism is an issue on the rise is just offensive. Australians don't deserve that guilt trip.